And we are
Okay,
live,
we
Senators.
are we are live. And good morning, everyone. Again, this is the Senate Transportation Committee. We're reconvening after our joint session. Our item this morning is Road Ecology and Staying Connected Initiative. We have three folks, I guess, in the room with us. And we'll start off with Chris Sleezar, Interim Environmental Program Manager, Agency of Transportation. Chris, are you with us?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Did I slaughter that last name there pretty bad or what?
No, not at all. Chris Sleezar.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
So
I'm the VTrans Highway Division Project Delivery Bureau, Environmental Resources Coordinator, and Interim Environmental Program Manager. Are you folks ready for our presentation?
Sure, we are ready. And
great.
Right
Excuse
ahead.
me for interrupting, please.
Yes.
Would you please enable my slideshow? I'm
Oh.
showing the slides for Mr. Sleezar at the moment.
Okay.
You're all set. Thank you.
Thanks, Jens.
Okay, tell us something about your background or what you do for the agencies.
Great. Thanks for inviting us to talk about road ecology this morning, which is one of the most exciting emerging fields and disciplines within transportation. For background, VTrans has a deep bench of environmental scientists and practitioners within the four what we call environmental pillars of VTrans. Andrea Wright leads the Policy and Planning Environmental Group. Craig DiGiamarino leads the Maintenance and Operations Environmental Group. Colin Judge heads up the Construction and Materials Bureau Environmental Group. And I'm leading a group of 15 top shelf environmental scientists, specialists, and analysts in the Project Delivery Bureau. So road ecology is the subject today. I'll start with a definition. Simply put, road ecology is about how transportation systems interact with and impact ecological systems. It's a complex web of overlapping topics like noise, water quality, habitat connectivity, air quality, and climate change. Now, on a policy level, we're thinking about these concepts everywhere. But on a project level, we're getting really good about prioritizing our focus and investing public dollars in only the most important places. So to be clear, we're not asking for wildlife accommodations on every transportation project, only where it's the most meaningful. Next slide, Jens, please. Thanks. Vermont is recognized internationally as a leader in road ecology, and we're frequently held up as an example of how departments of transportation and departments of fish and wildlife can effectively collaborate. We enjoy a wonderful collaborative relationship. Jens and John and I have been invited to talk about this all over the place in Connecticut, Sacramento, Quebec City, and Montreal, just to name a few. Our success is due in large part because we're looking at the ecological interaction of our entire transportation system within the landscape. So we're not just checking the state and federal regulatory boxes on a project by project basis. It's a really much more holistic approach. Now, the concept of road ecology has gone from the fringe to mainstream in the short time that John, Jens, and I have been working together. And nothing illustrates this better than Katrin Einhorn's, I think it was June 2021, article in the New York Times on wildlife crossings in the US. Vermont was featured in this article alongside some of the really big Western states that are well known for wildlife crossing. And this was incredibly important because it demonstrates that ecological connectivity can happen on multiple scales. We're not always talking about the large herds of iconic migratory Western species. So a quick aside on that New York Times article, there were about 400 public comments, and typically I avoid the public comments in the newspaper like I avoid the plague. But because I had a vested interest in this article, I read each and every one of them. And with the exception of two kind of neutral wisecracks about why the chicken did or did not cross the road, all of the comments, the public comments, were 100% supportive. And so when was the last time that happened with, especially an environmental article? I think never. So anyway, I'll turn it over to John. I think you're up now.
Great, thanks, Chris. And good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is John Austin, and I am the Land and Habitat Program Manager with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. And very grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you this morning and share with you a little bit about the great collaborative working relationship that we enjoy with our sister agency, the Vermont Agency of Transportation. So VTrans and the Fish and Wildlife Department take great pride in our collaborative relationship that's been forged over many years and see it as a model for effective state government. Having professionals from both agencies speaking with you this morning is an illustration of this collaborative spirit. The slide that you're looking at shows folks from both VTrans and the Fish and Wildlife Department going through what you'll learn about more shortly is the Habitat and Highways training, where they learn a little bit about wildlife ecology and their relationship to roads. Our collaboration was forged from an early history of Russian-style diplomacy and the permit processes, as we like to reflect, to a realization that we had far more to gain by working to support one another's mission and interests while understanding and respecting the challenges each agency has to contend with. Our productive working relationship reflects our shared interest in providing Vermonters with a healthy environment and a safe, reliable transportation system, and these are not mutually exclusive. Working together helps achieve these shared interests by minimizing animal vehicle collisions, improving safety for the traveling public, enabling fish and wildlife to move around the landscape to access important habitat, and ultimately keeping our natural landscape ecologically connected. Next slide, please, Jens. These interests are directly related to our focus on climate change these days. A landscape that is well connected by natural habitats, streams, rivers, and wetlands allows plants and animals and ecological processes to move in response to changes in our climate. And of course, transportation infrastructure like bridges and culverts are designed to accommodate our now too often flood events and are essential form of adaptation to climate. Fortunately, there are co-benefits associated with adopting these new standards for our transportation systems. Plants and animals, of course, are constantly moving and adjusting to changes associated with climate and other factors. And impediments to animal movement, like roads and development, are important factors to consider as we plan for a healthy environment. Next slide, please, Jens. For long-term success in protecting the health of our environment, it's essential that we consider the need for fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats to move and shift across the landscape at multiple scales. So on the left-hand side of this slide, we look at sort of the larger regional scale. So from the regional scale, where moose, Canada lynx, fisher are moving across this larger region, independent of political boundaries and roads, to what you see on the right, the more state-specific local habitat connections where bobcats, black bear, and wood turtles are using important habitats to survive. One of the most important opportunities for successfully addressing this fundamental conservation need, that is maintaining a connected landscape, is through incorporating it into our transportation systems and project planning. So we're going to transition back now to Mr. Slesar, and he's going to share with you some of the details of how our interagency partnership functions.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so within VTrans and Fish and Wildlife, there exists a small team of staff level practitioners and program managers that form an ad hoc interagency wildlife crossing steering committee. And this group meets quarterly, and we report out to agency leadership on initiatives that we're working on. It's important to note that these initiatives really transcend the normal project dialogues, and they're more about developing planning tools, trainings, and peer exchanges that move us all forward in terms of habitat connectivity and road ecology. Most of these initiatives are funded with Federal Highway Administration state planning and research funds known as SPR. So it's not necessarily project funds that we're working with to do this work. VTrans and Fish and Wildlife identified some shared goals relative to wildlife and habitat connectivity. And in 2005, we codified those shared goals in a memorandum of agreement, which was refreshed in 2015. Next slide, please, Jens. Some of the programmatic and process-related mechanisms where environmental considerations plug into our programs and projects, I would just like to illustrate those. We're looking at this concept early on. We're looking at it during corridor planning, identifying environmental considerations at a very large scale for an entire corridor at a kind of holistic corridor approach. Then we're using a new methodical decision-making process tool, and I probably can't come up with what the acronym stands for, but it's VPSP2, and that includes consideration of environmental assets such as habitat and habitat connectivity in the early decision-making processes for selecting projects. And
what is that little black thing?
That thank you for asking. That is a spring salamander, and they're rarely seen, but that is they're an indication of really clean water.
Okay.
And when you find those, you have a really healthy stream with a lot of like airflow and dissolved oxygen in the water.
Chairman Mazza,
Yes.
growing up, we used to have those salamanders come out of the faucet into a glass of water.
Really?
Yeah, from our spring.
No,
So
I
it's
never-
nice to know that our spring was nice and clean. But
Oh.
yes.
I never seen one. I didn't know what that's a big one though. That's pretty big.
Well,
They
look
get-
at it. It's the size of, it's in your hand. It's not, but it would make its way through the water pipe. Probably we still had old pump logs at that point. But
that's epic. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to share that with Jim Andrews.
Yeah, well, you don't have it with artesian wells, I can tell you.
You don't find them in bottled water either. Yeah.
No.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the last point in terms of the project related stuff is that we front load our project development process with resource ID. So we identify resources in and around a project area before we even have conceptual plans. And that can help steer decision makings about the scope of a project. Next slide, please, Jens. So highways and habitats. Yeah, I frequently get asked about how VTrans has established and nurtured a culture that embraces environmental ethics and understands the importance of wildlife and habitat connectivity. Probably the most effective tool we have for that is our highways and habitats training, which is supported by the Federal Highway SPR funds. We've been doing that since 2002. These trainings have been an excellent way to expose transportation professionals to the importance and fundamentals of road ecology. It's been an extraordinarily popular course. We always have a waiting list. Over the years, nearly 200 staff have gone through this program. And because of these trainings, we're confident that design and engineering staff understand the value of habitat connectivity and support, even take ownership of wildlife connectivity issues. So when these issues come up on a project, we don't really have the conversation of why should we care about this? It's more why is it important on this project and on this site? So we sort of transcend that original conversation. Because of highways and habitats, because it's an interagency effort, there's now a cultural of mutual understanding between VTrans and Fish and Wildlife staff. VTrans engineers and project managers understand the value of connectivity, and they can devise real-world, cost-effective solutions. And their colleagues at Fish and Wildlife understand the challenges that the transportation engineers are facing. Next slide, please, Jens. So, really popular course. Leadership embrace this training within the context of VTrans strategic workforce development. And leadership asked us to figure out a way to make this training available to more people and with less of a time commitment. So we developed an online primer, a tier 1, similar to the tiers of the rivers and road training. So tier 1 is now available to all state employees. It's a 90-minute virtual experience. It's available to all employees through our learning management system. It's also available to our road crews, and at VTrans, anybody can take it. It's part of our onboarding process. And anybody from attorneys general to plow truck drivers can take the training. Tiers 2 and 3 target a progressively smaller and more specialized audience, and that gets the participants out into the fields discussing the nuts and bolts. Next slide, please, Jens. So the big take-home message here is that wildlife crossings work. And the next thing you'll see on the screen is a GIF, stitched together images of the Monkton Amphibian crossing project. Now, the challenge for all of us is when we're making investments with public money is to make sure that the locations make sense. We know how to do wildlife crossings and they work. This capturing amphibians with a motion sensor camera is really tricky. So what we did was we set a camera to fire one shot per minute over the course of the migration. And the little dots you see dashing through the culvert there are amphibians. We've documented over 2,000 animals each year migrating back and forth through these culverts. Next slide, please, Jens. Same culvert, but I guess amphibian crossings aren't just for amphibians anymore, right? This is a bobcat. We've a whole suite of species are using these. So when done properly, wildlife crossings can accommodate multiple species. And in addition to that take-home message, just want to say that we're honing in on locations and we're intentional about where we put these things. So we're not asking for wildlife accommodations on every project, just where they are most warranted. And with that,
how do the animals know how to use it? Do they go to it instinctively?
The bobcat.
I'd like to get my cat to use the culvert. So
Jane, they got signs that say animals enter here.
Oh, I know.
Blinking signs. I think the bobcats have chosen to use it. They like cover. They like to feel secure. And so they like to move through there. The amphibians are channeled in through retaining walls and drift fences. So it'd just be dumb luck if they found it, but we use walls to funnel them in.
All right. I was just wondering, I assume that might be sort of the case.
Can a deer walk through there?
Not through that one.
Okay.
Nope. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Hilke. Thanks, Jens. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, members of the committee. My name is Jens Hilke. I'm a conservation planning biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. I've worked closely with the Vermont Agency of Transportation Environmental section on our shared interests since I first started with the department in 2006. Mr. Chairman, you asked if deer could pass through that one. They couldn't, but they sure can make it under this bridge. Chris has already mentioned that having resource identification in the early scoping stage of a project allows for greater flexibility and better outcomes. Now, in our experience, the vast majority of structures that VTrans builds new already meet multiple values. Like this one you see from Hyde Park in 2008, There's nothing particularly special about this project, but just by meeting our new hydrologic formulas, it is accommodating wildlife interests. So by updating these hydrologic models after Hurricane Irene, we're building bigger climate resilient structures with abutments farther back away from the water. That's protecting the bridge. It's also allowing for wildlife movement. This is allowing for aquatic organism passage within the stream and terrestrial wildlife movement beside the stream at normal flows. So our normal replacements are quite good for meeting multiple values. The problem has been the thousands of older structures. But with new investments in infrastructure, we're hopeful that more and more of these older structures can be replaced and appropriately sized to meet the challenges of our climate change reality. One of the ways we've been able to institutionalize our road ecology work is by trying pilot projects and assessing their efficacy. Here at left, you can see where the Little River meets the Winooski River in Waterbury. And this also happens to be where I-89 and Route 2 cross overhead. In 2014, as part of the Route 2 upgrade project, we experimented with adding fill on top of the large boulders under the bridge that protect the abutment to provide a smooth surface for animals to pass underneath. This is particularly important for species with hooves that struggle to move over that type of terrain. We monitored the site with game cameras before and after construction. In this video, you can see that the deer have already started using it even before we removed the erosion control matting. Now, today, this practice is part of the standard design used on large bridges, since it adds a negligible amount to the overall cost of the project, but it's incredibly successful for wildlife. Now, similar in concept to adding fill over the rocks under bridges is providing connections through culverts with a constructed wildlife shelf. You may be able to see in the diagram at right that there's a little shelf on the right-hand side of the opening. These can be extremely effective for small and medium-sized mammals. It's a simple and inexpensive addition to a culvert project. The department and VTrans have worked with the Nature Conservancy over the last several years to assess every bridge and culvert on the state system for its passability to wildlife. This information helps our transportation managers prioritize which structures would be most important to replace and appropriately size for wildlife when they reach the end of their service life. Again, we're being very careful and systematic about where we invest public dollars. At the department, we're also improving the quality of the data that we make available to VTrans and Vermont municipalities for their planning. Here you see the 2018 model of wildlife road crossings. These are sites based on where there's tree cover on both sides of the road where wildlife are likely to cross. This is the third version of updates to this data set, and another version is currently in the works. These data are part of Vermont Conservation Design and are available to every Vermonter on the BioFinder website. The department provides the best scientific data that we can at a variety of scales to express this network of connectivity for wildlife. We also share data on habitat connectivity at the landscape scale. The wildlife road crossings that I just showed you are the pinch points. That's where the road network and the wildlife network overlap. But a continuous pathway beyond those pinch points are vital for ensuring long-term connectivity and genetic exchange in response to climate change. So data sets like what you see on screen at that regional scale are incredibly important for our technical assistance to municipalities in their land use planning. This scale of data also allows us to work with land protection agencies outside of the right-of-way Again, it helps us increase the efficacy of our projects that use public funds. It helps us guarantee that where we invest public money in the right-of-way to work for wildlife, that it will actually work by being a part of this larger network. Here's another project that I'd like to tell you about to illustrate how our work meets multiple values. This is Route 15 in Wolcott, where the Wild Branch goes underneath. Yeah, you can see the bridge at right. Now, we've had game cameras under this bridge for many years, but we only found a few species that were willing to use it, underneath that bridge. We also had cameras in adjacent forest blocks and found a rich species diversity there. Just upstream at the top of this image, you can see there was a derelict town-owned bridge whose abutments were literally in the river. So we formed a working group, including VTrans, the Fish and Wildlife Department, the Nature Conservancy, and the Lamoille Regional Planning Commission, and we worked with the town of Wolcott. Over the next 3 years, we received a block grant from the Department of Environmental Conservation to remove a berm that you can see at left and restore the hydrology across the floodplain. We removed the town-owned bridge to improve water quality, to limit flooding and the ice damming that was a significant problem for North Wolcott Road. And this was an intentional disinvestment of infrastructure that was no longer needed. Lastly, we built a wildlife shelf under Route 15 across that rocky substrate, and we're replanting this whole floodplain to allow for better wildlife connectivity. So we've talked a lot about the different scales that road ecology applies to, from that site level wildlife road crossing to large forest blocks and even this eco-regional scale. Please understand, coordination is critically important piece in all of this, since no one partner can do it all. The Vermont Agency of Transportation and the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department have been partners in what's called the Staying Connected Initiative since it was first founded in 2009. This is a public-private partnership focused on maintaining forested connections for wildlife and people across the entire Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion, from the Tug Hill Plateau in New York to the Gaspé Peninsula. This partnership involves all of the fish and wildlife agencies and all of the agencies of transportation on the US side of the border, and most of those on the Canadian side as well. And there are numerous NGO partners involved. In my humble opinion, participation in coordinating partnerships like this is how government is supposed to operate. This offers coordination at the eco-regional scale. There's a steering committee at that scale that we help serve on and set the direction for. This helps coordinate actions across all the partners. So again, the DOTs work inside of the right-of-way, but that's coordinated with other partners. So public investments for wildlife are going to be more likely to succeed. There's also a group that works at the Vermont scale, and I serve as the coordinator for that group. We meet quarterly and focus on Vermont issues, from science and policy to individual wildlife road crossing sites. So this nested coordination is critically important so that the good work we do in Vermont can be replicated elsewhere, and so that we can learn from others and adopt those more regional approaches. The Staying Connected Partnership uses a multi-pronged approach to get at this issue of habitat connectivity from multiple angles, and it allows each partner to do the work they do best and also know how others are going to fit in. It begins with the best conservation science. And in Vermont, we're relying on Vermont conservation design, as well as a mix of models that can be overlapped to identify consensus points. As we stated, Vermont Agency of Transportation and the Fish and Wildlife Department are focused on that transportation system and fixing those pinch points of overlap. But we also have groups of partners involved in land protection for willing landowners and municipal land use planning that work outside of the right-of-way, and they can help maintain that network of connected lands and waters. Again, this coordination is critically important to the work of both agencies, and helps ensure that our investments of public dollars in infrastructure that helps wildlife is effective into the future. Thank you. John, please take it over.
Thanks, Jens. Okay, thank you everybody for hanging in there with us. I know it's coming up towards the lunch hour, so we're almost done. I just want to pick up where Jens left off and talking about partnerships through the Staying Connected initiative and how that's been reflected in some various policy initiatives. An outgrowth of the Staying Connected initiative was a resolution that was put into effect in 2018 by the New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Premiers Association at that time. The resolution recognizes the importance of maintaining the ecologically connected landscape of the Northeast region for many public interests, obvious to all of you, I'm sure, the tourism economies, the outdoor recreation economies, the working land economies, building a landscape that's resilient to climate change and associated natural disasters, and much more. The resolution, which is in effect a policy statement on behalf of the leadership of the region, directs all 11 jurisdictions in the region from Connecticut and Rhode Island right up to Newfoundland, Labrador, to work together to identify what this regionally connected landscape actually looks like, and then to coordinate on how best to maintain it through a wide range of conservation measures, arguably the most important of which is our focus on transportation systems and infrastructure. Next slide, please, Jens. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here, and then if the committee has questions, happy to continue chatting. I guess I just want to reinforce one of the main points that we've tried to share with you today. We've made great progress through the Staying Connected initiative, the support and vision from the regional leadership through that resolution I just mentioned. And Vermont remains a model for how to do this sort of collaboration really well. And as I think you can tell, we're very proud of that. And we've come to learn that, in fact, some of our colleagues in other states and Canadian provinces have worked to adopt our collaborative approach. We've seen it happen in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and other jurisdictions. So they're picking up the good model that we've created, and that's really great. So I guess we just want to, express our pride for the work that we're doing and how well we work together. I do think that it's a model for state government supporting one another rather than just working independently or we're still at odds with one another. And looking out for shared public interests, which is, we all share the same constituents, and it's the citizens of Vermont. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. And Mr. Chair, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
That was very informative. I didn't realize that we did so much for that. That's very, very good. Questions from anyone on the committee? I don't see everybody. Anybody had any questions? That was a great presentation, and I'm glad to see you're all working together so well. I didn't realize we had done so much or doing so much. It's very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you kindly. We appreciate the time today.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.